Moving into the one-room apartment with my boyfriend had been a whirlwind. The city was new, and adjusting to life in this small space took some time. Adding to the situation was his best friend, who had temporarily moved in with us while he settled into his new job in the same company as my boyfriend. The dynamic was strange but manageable, and the three of us soon found a rhythm. Work, meals, and small talk. Life was calm, almost too calm. 2 days before the Eerie incident, my hometown was shaken by tragic news. A close friend had passed away. I hadn't yet processed it fully. Life in the city kept me busy, and in a way, that distraction helped me cope with the grief I hadn't allowed myself to feel. It felt like the sorrow was suspended, hanging in the air but not fully acknowledged. The routine of my days remained the same. My boyfriend and his friend would return from work together, toss their jackets onto the couch, and head straight to the kitchen. We often sat together, eating dinner, talking about trivial things. But that evening something shifted. As we prepared for dinner, I could sense a heaviness in the air. The conversation in the kitchen drifted toward a more somber topic. They began talking about my recently deceased friend. The air seemed to thicken with every mention of his name. I felt uneasy, but I brushed it off as grief bubbling beneath the surface. Needing a moment to clear my head, I excused myself to the bathroom. As I closed the door, something strange happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure, a tall man wearing a black t-shirt, quietly entering the room behind me. For a second, I thought nothing of it. I assumed it was my boyfriend or his friend going to change. But something felt off. I quickly finished washing my hands and stepped out, expecting to find one of them in the room. The space was empty. The door was slightly ajar, but no one had entered. Confused, I walked to the kitchen where the two friends were still sitting, chatting like nothing had happened. They hadn't moved. They hadn't gone into the room. My skin prickled with the realization that I had seen something, or someone, that wasn't there. As I sat down with them, I couldn't shake the image of that tall figure. It had been so clear, so real. My friend, who had passed away, had been tall and always wore black t-shirts. My mind raced. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, stress from the funeral weighing on my mind. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the cold, creeping feeling that I had just seen his presence. Over the next few days, strange things began happening in the apartment. Items would go missing only to turn up in odd places. Doors would creak open, even though none of us had touched them. My boyfriend dismissed it as the quirks of an old building, but I wasn't so sure. One night, I woke up to the sound of faint footsteps. They seemed to come from the kitchen, and they were slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. I nudged my boyfriend awake, but by the time he stirred, the noise had stopped. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the growing sense of unease was hard to ignore. Things escalated one evening when I was home alone. The lights flickered as I sat reading a book, and the atmosphere in the apartment grew unbearably cold. I glanced up to see that the door to our bedroom, which had been firmly shut, was now wide open. My heart raced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I heard a faint, almost imperceptible sigh. It was as if something was watching me. I quickly left the room, not daring to look behind me. My boyfriend and his friend were oblivious to the strange occurrences, but I couldn't escape the eerie sensation that lingered in every corner of the apartment. Late one night, as I lay in bed, I saw movement in the hallway, a shadow that didn't belong to either of us. It hovered there for a moment before disappearing into the darkness. The temperature in the room dropped, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I wasn't just imagining things. Something was in our home. A week after seeing the shadow, I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I glanced at the mirror. At first, everything seemed normal, but as I leaned in closer, I saw him. The reflection behind me wasn't my boyfriend or his friend. It was the tall man in the black t-shirt, standing just out of focus. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the empty space where he had stood. I finally confided in my boyfriend, telling him everything I had experienced. He listened patiently but remained skeptical. "It's just stress," he said. "You've been through a lot with your friend's death." I wanted to believe him, but the occurrences were becoming more frequent, more intense. The figure in the black t-shirt was no longer just a fleeting shadow. It felt like he was part of the apartment now, woven into its fabric. One night, I dreamt of my friend who had passed away. In the dream, he stood at the foot of my bed, his expression sad but calm. "I didn't mean to stay here," he whispered, his voice distant, almost echoing. "But I can't leave until you help me." I woke up in a cold sweat, my mind racing. What did he mean? How could I help him? Was his spirit really trapped in the apartment? Desperate for answers, I reached out to a close friend who was into spiritual practices. She suggested we hold a séance to communicate with the spirit and help him find peace. Reluctantly, my boyfriend agreed to participate. That night, we lit candles and sat in a circle in the living room. As the séance began, the air grew thick with tension. We called out to the spirit, asking if it was my friend who had passed. After a few moments of silence, the room grew colder, and the candle flames flickered wildly. A low voice whispered, "Help me." Through the séance, we learned that my friend's spirit had been drawn to me, unable to move on because he hadn't had the chance to say goodbye. He had been trying to reach out, to let me know that he was still with me. I felt a surge of emotion, sadness, guilt, but also relief. We performed a ritual to help him move on, saying our goodbyes and wishing him peace in the afterlife. As the candles flickered out, I felt a weight lift from the apartment. The air seemed lighter, warmer, as though the dark presence had finally departed. After that night, the strange occurrences stopped. The apartment felt like ours again, free of a shadow that had haunted it for so long. I still think of my friend sometimes, but now it's with a sense of closure. He had been trying to reach out, not to harm me, but to find peace. And now he had finally found it. Weeks passed, and the peace that settled over the apartment was almost tangible. The eerie chill that used to sweep through the rooms was gone, and I felt at ease for the first time since the haunting began. My boyfriend and I fell back into our normal routine, and his friend had moved out, leaving us with more space and a sense of quiet that was welcome after the strange events. But one night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a soft, almost indistinct whisper. It was faint, like a breeze, but it was unmistakable, a voice, just on the edge of hearing. "Remember me." I shot up in bed, my heart racing. My eyes darted around the room, but everything was still, calm. My boyfriend stirred beside me, oblivious to the whisper. I told myself it was just a lingering memory from the séance, a part of my mind that hadn't let go. But then I heard it again the next night. This time it was louder, more insistent. It wasn't a cry for help, like before. It felt like a reminder. The following day, I found myself drawn to my friend's old social media profiles. It felt odd, even wrong, to scroll through his pictures, frozen in time as if he were still alive. Each photo brought back memories, some happy, some bittersweet, but something felt off. It was as though the more I looked, the more I felt his presence creeping back into my life. That night, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer just fleeting sounds. They had become persistent, as though someone was standing just outside my room, trying to get my attention. This time, I heard him more clearly. "Don't forget," as I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to understand why my friend's spirit hadn't fully moved on. A forgotten memory resurfaced. It was from years ago, long before his death. We had made a promise to each other, an innocent, childhood vow that we'd look out for one another, no matter what. I had forgotten about it after he passed, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't. Maybe that's why he hadn't left completely. Maybe he felt I had abandoned our promise. I needed answers. I needed to know why he was still lingering, why the whispers were growing stronger. Desperate, I reached out to the same friend who had helped with the séance. She suggested we try something different this time, something more powerful, more direct. "There's still unfinished business," she said. "You need to confront it." That night, We gathered in the apartment again, this time armed with a plan to reach out to my friend's spirit once more. We needed to know what he wanted, why he hadn't crossed over completely, and what I could do to help him move on for good. As we began the ritual, the atmosphere grew heavy again, but this time it felt different. The presence in the room was no longer the same quiet, sorrowful energy I had felt before. It was urgent, restless, as though my friend was trying to tell me something important. We called out to him, asking him to make his presence known. The candle flames flickered wildly, and the temperature dropped dramatically. Then, in a voice that sounded both familiar and distant, I heard it again, the promise. My heart sank. He was holding on because of the promise we had made when we were younger. I realized then that I had forgotten something crucial, something he couldn't let go of. Suddenly it all clicked into place. The promise wasn't just a vague childhood pact. It had been real to him, and it was something we both took seriously. We had promised to stay connected, to always be there for each other. In my grief, I had let go, but he hadn't. I spoke aloud, addressing him directly. I haven't forgotten. I'm still here. I will always remember you. The room grew warmer, and for a brief moment, I could feel his presence soften, as if he was finally at peace with my words. Over the next few nights, the whispers faded. The presence that had once haunted the apartment seemed to dissipate, leaving behind a strange sense of calm. I could feel that my friend had finally accepted that our connection didn't need to be physical for me to honor our promise. He was free to move on, and so was I. I had expected his departure to feel sad, but instead it brought relief. I knew now that he had found peace, and in a way, so had I. With my friend's spirit no longer lingering, life returned to normal. My boyfriend and I decided to redecorate the apartment, freshening it up with new colors and furniture to symbolize this new chapter in our lives. We even moved the bedroom around, and for the first time the space felt truly ours. As the days went on, I found myself thinking less about the haunting and more about the happy memories I had shared with my friend. Instead of the eerie sense of his presence, I was left with a sense of closure, knowing that we had honored our bond in the best way we could. One evening, several weeks after the final seance, I was tidying up the apartment when I came across an old picture of my friend and me, tucked away in a drawer. Seeing his face again stirred up a mix of emotions, but there was no sadness or fear, just warmth. However, as I stared at the photo, I noticed something strange. In the corner of the picture, there was a faint blur, like a shadow, hovering behind us. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed almost deliberate, as if my friend was still leaving me a small reminder that he was always watching over me. Though the haunting had ended, and my friend's spirit had moved on, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there in some way, like an unseen guardian. There were no more whispers, no more shadows, but every now and then something small would happen. A breeze when the windows were closed, a book falling off a shelf without reason. It was as though he was gently reminding me of his presence, letting me know he hadn't truly left. It wasn't unsettling anymore. In fact, it was comforting. I knew that no matter what, he would always be with me, just not in the way I had first feared. I visited my friend's grave not long after, bringing flowers and spending some quiet moments reflecting on everything that had happened. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that our bond had transcended death. There was no longer any fear or sadness attached to his memory, only love and the knowledge that he had found his place in the afterlife. As I stood there, a light breeze rustled the leaves around me, and for a brief moment, I felt his presence again. It was as though he was saying goodbye one last time, and this time, I was ready to let go. With my friend finally at rest, life carried on. My boyfriend and I grew closer, and the apartment became our sanctuary once again. We often talked about the strange events that had unfolded, but there was no longer any lingering fear. Instead, we felt grateful for the lessons we had learned and for the reminder that even in death, love and connection remain. As time went on, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of life, death, and the bonds we share with those we love. I no longer feared the unknown. Instead, I embraced the idea that there was more to this world than we could see, and that those we care about never truly leave us. The whispers had stopped, but the message they carried lived on. A year after the haunting had ended, my boyfriend and I decided to move to a bigger apartment. As we packed up our belongings, I found that old photo of my friend again, the one with the faint shadow in the corner. I smiled, knowing that wherever I went, a part of him would always be with me. We moved into our new home with a sense of excitement for the future, but I would never forget the lessons from the past. Every now and then, in the quiet moments of life, I think back to the haunting, to the whispers and the shadows that once filled our apartment. And though they are gone now, they left behind a lasting impact, a reminder that love, memory, and connection transcend time and space. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the world is still and quiet, I hear a faint whisper on the wind. Remember me, and I always will.